Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Easy Agile podcast. I'm Terlya, People and Culture Business Partner at Easy Agile.
And I'm Caitlin, Marketing Coordinator at Easy Agile, and we'll be your hosts for this episode.
Before we begin, Easy Agile would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we broadcast today, the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend the same respect to any Aboriginal people listening with us today.
Today, we'll be joined by Jazmin, Chamizo and Rakesh Singh. Both Jazmin and Rakesh are principal contributors and researchers of Reimagining Agile for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, a report that explores the intersection between Agile, business agility and diversity, equity and inclusion, published in May 2021.
We're really excited to have Jazmin and Rakesh join us today, so let's jump in.
So Jazmin and Rakesh, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to be here with you both today having the conversation. So I suppose today we'll be unpacking and asking you questions in relation to the report, which you were both principal contributors of, Reimagining Agility with Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. So for our audience tuning in today who may be unfamiliar with the report, Jazmin, could you please give us a summary of what it's all about?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much for having us here today and for your interest in our report. Just to give you a little bit of background of our research and how everything started out. The founder and the owner of the Business Agility Institute, Evan Lyburn, he actually attended a talk given by Mark Green. And Mark, who used to be, an Agile coach, he was referring to his not very positive experience with Agile. So, this actually grabbed the attention of Evan, who was, a big advocate of, agility, as all of us are. And they decided to embark upon, this adventure and, do some research, trying to probe on and investigate on the potential relationship between diversity, equity, and inclusion and Agile. So we had, a couple of hypotheses at the beginning of the research. And the first hypothesis was that despite the positive intent of agility and, despite the positive mindset and the values of Agile, which, we all share, Agile organizations may be at the risk of further excluding marginalized staff and customers. And the second hypothesis that we had was that organizations who actually embed diversity, equity, and inclusion, directly into their Agile transformation and a strategy may outperform those organizations who don't. So we actually spent more than a year interviewing, different participants, from many different countries. And we actually ended up, seeing that, those hypotheses are true. And, we would like to share with you, part of, this research, and also to encourage you to read the whole report and also contribute to this discussion.
Amazing. And Jazmin, you touched on this a little bit in your answer just then, but I guess, Rakesh, could you tell us a bit more about what was the inspiration and catalyst for writing this report?
Yeah, so thanks for inviting once again, and it's a great opportunity to talk about this beautiful project. The BAI was actually into this activity for a long time, and I happened to hear one of the presentation from Evan, and this presentation actually got me interested into business agility and associated with BAI. So that was one thing. And second thing, when Evan talked about this particular project, invited all of us. I had been with transformation in my job with Siemens for about 3 decades, for a very long time. And we found that there were always some people, whenever you do transformation, they were not interested or they were skeptical. We are wasting our time. And okay, that was to be expected. But what was surprising that even though Agile came up in a big way, and people thought, okay, this is a solution to all our miseries. Even though there was a focus on culture, culture was still the biggest issue. So it appeared to me that we are not really addressing the problem. And when, as Jazmin talked about our goal and our hypothesis, and that was attractive to me, that maybe this project will help me to understand how to get the people on board in some of the agile transformation.
Thank you. That's awesome. I think it definitely comes through in the report that this is, a topic that's near and dear to all of you. And in the report, you mentioned there's a lack of consensus and some misalignment in defining some of these key terms. So I thought to frame the conversation today, Jazmin, could you walk us through some of these key definitions? Agility, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's a great question. No, because over the last year, there's been a big boom on different topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, and many different events that have affected our society in general. And with the rise of social movements, there's been a lot of talk in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we talk about agility, equality, equity, and inclusion and diversity, it's very important to have a very clear understanding of what we mean with these terms. Agility is a mindset. It's really about having the customer, the people at the very center of the organization. So we're talking about agile ways of working. We're talking about more collaborative ways of working. So we can bring the best out of people and then innovate and and bring put products into the market as fast as possible. Now, when we were thinking about, agility and, this whole idea of, putting people at the very core and the customer at the very core of the organization so we can respond in a very agile and nimble way to the challenges that our society presents at the moment, we found a lot of commonalities and a lot of similarities with diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there are some nuances in the concepts that we need to understand. Diversity really refers to the mix. It refers to numbers, to statistics, all the differences that we have. There's a very long list of types of diversity, diversity of gender, sexual orientation, ways of thinking, our socioeconomic status, education, and you name it, several types of diversity. Now, when we talk about equality, we're talking about applying the same resources and support structures, for all, right? However, equality does not actually imply the element of equity, which is so important when we talk about creating inclusive environments. With equity, we're talking about the element of fair treatment. We're talking about social justice. We're talking about giving equal access to opportunities for all. So it's pretty much about leveling the field, so all those voices can be part of the conversation and everybody can contribute to the decision making in organizations and in society. So it's that element of fair treatment, is that element of social justice that the element of equity has to contribute and that we really need to pay attention to. And inclusion is really about that act of welcoming people in the organization. It's about creating all the conditions so people, everybody can thrive and everybody can succeed in an organization. So I think it's very important, to have those definitions, very clear, to get a better understanding of how they overlap and how there's actually a symbiotic relationship between these concepts.
Yeah, great. And I think just building on that, interaction, collaboration, and helping every team member reach their potential is what makes Agile work. So your report discusses that there are lots of overlaps in those values with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think, Rakesh, what are those key overlaps? It seems those qualities and traits go hand in hand. So how do we embrace them?
So if you see most of the organizations which are big organization and been for about 2 decades or so, and you compare them with a startup organization. So in the traditional setup, normally people are working in their functional silos, so to say. And so the agile transformation is taken care by one business function. It could be a quality team, it could be a transformation team. And DI normally is a domain of an HR or people-oriented organization. And the issue is that sometimes these initiatives, they are handled separately. And there's the amount of collaboration that's required does not happen. Whereas in a startup company, they don't have these kind of divisions. So looking that as a basis, what we need to look at is that the organization should be sensitized that they work together on some of these projects and look at the underlying, what is the commonality, and they can possibly either help each other or complement each other. Because one example is, if I can give, it's very easy to justify an agile transformation relating to a business outcome, okay? But any people-related change is a very long-term change. So you cannot relate that to a business outcome in a shorter time frame. So I call Agile and DEI as symbiotic. An Agile can be helped by a DEI process, and DEI itself can be justified by having an Agile project. So they are symbiotic. Now, what is the common thing between the two? So there are 4 items. I mean, there are many things which are common, but 4 things which I find are most important. Yeah? The first thing is respect for people. Like Jazmin talked about being inclusive, you know. So respect for people, both Agile and DEI, that's a basis for that, and make people feel welcome. So where, no matter what diversity they come from, what background they come from, they are feeling welcome. Yeah. The second part is the work environment. Yeah? So it's a big challenge to create some kind of a psychological safety. And I think people are now organizing, the management is now understanding that they think that they are provided a safe place, but people are still not feeling safe for whatever reason they are. That's one thing. The other thing is that whatever policies you write, you know, documentation, policies, or pronouncements, the basic thing is that people see, is it fair and is it transparent? Yeah. So I used to always say that if there are 2 people given bonus, yeah, if one person gets 5% more, no matter how big is the amount, there's always felt that, you know, I have not got my due. Yeah. So be fair and be transparent. And the last one is that you have to invest in people. The organization need to invest in enabling them with opportunity to make use of new opportunity and also grow and through learning. So these are 4 things that I can say, which actually can help both being an agile and also having inclusive environment in the company.
The report mentions that some of those opportunities to combine agile and diversity, equity, and inclusion are being overlooked. Why do you think this is?
So I think the reason why they are being overlooked is that it's basically educating the leaders. So it's just if I'm in the agile world, I do not really realize that, you know, there are certain people-related aspects. I think people will, if I just make an announcement, people will participate. Okay, so that's the understanding. On the other side, we got an input from quite a few respondents saying that some of the DEI projects are basically towards not really sincere about it. Yeah, it's a waste of time. I'm being forced to do certain training. I'm forced. So the sincerity part, sometimes there's a lacking. So people have to be educated more at a leadership level and also at an employee level.
I think a really interesting call out in your research is that many agile processes and rituals are built to suit the majority, which excludes team members with diverse attributes. Jazmin, what are some of those rituals?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, if we think about agile and agile rituals, and you know, for example, I mean, daily stand-ups, a lot of those rituals have not actually thought about, diversity or the design, for diversity and inclusion. I mean, Agile is a very on the spot, and it's a very, who can talk, type of rituals, but there's a lot of people, who might need more time, to process information, before they can provide, inputs, so fast. So that that requirement of processing information or, giving input in a very fast manner, in daily stand-ups, that might be overlooking the fact that a lot of people, with a different type of, thought processing styles or preferences, may need more time, to carry out those processes. So that would be, number one. The fact that it's very like on the spot, and sometimes only the loud voices, can be heard. So we might be losing a lot of opportunities, trying to get feedback and input, from people, with different thinking styles. Now, also, if you think about organizations in different countries, where English is not, the native language of a lot of, of people, they may also feel at a disadvantage. This happens a lot in, multinational organizations, where people whose, first language is English, they feel more confident, and, they are the ones, who practically may monopolize the conversation. So, for people whose first language is not English, they might feel at a disadvantage. If you think about, older employees who sometimes, may not be part of an agile transformation, they might also feel they're not being part of the team, and they may feel they may not have this sense of belonging, which is so important in an agile transformation and for any organization. Another example would be people who because of their religious belief, they need maybe to pray 5 times in a day, and maybe a morning stand up might be very difficult to adapt to, or even people with disabilities or language differences may feel a little intimidated by agile. So there's a lot of different examples, and the report actually collects several lived experiences by the respondents that we interview that illustrate how agile has been designed for the majority and for a more dominant type of culture, and that highlights the need to redesign many of these rituals and many of these practices.
Yeah, I think just building on that, in your recommendations, you mentioned consciously recreating and redesigning these agile ways of working. What are some of the ways we can rethink and consciously create these?
Mm-hmm. Well, the good news is that during our research, and during our field work and the conversations that we had with some organizations, there's a lot of companies and organizations that have actively implemented different types of practices, starting from the way they're managing their meetings, their rituals, their stand-ups, giving people an opportunity to communicate in different ways, maybe giving some room for silence, and so people can process their information, or providing alternative channels for people to communicate and comment either in writing, or maybe the next day. So it doesn't have to be right there on the spot, and they don't feel under that type of pressure. Now, another example, would be allowing people, to also communicate, in their native language. Not necessarily, using English, all the time as, the main language. I think it's also important for people, to feel that they can contribute, with their own language. And also, starting to analyze, the employee experience. We're talking about, maybe using non-binary options in recruitment processes or in payroll. Starting to be more inclusive in the different practices, and analyzing the whole employee journey. Those are some examples that we can start implementing, to creating a more inclusive environments. And the one that is the most important for me is encouraging leadership. To intentionally design inclusive work environments, through the use of by creating environments that are really where people feel safe, where they have this psychologically safe.
The whole section on exploring and challenging existing beliefs is so interesting, and I would definitely encourage everyone listening to go and read it. I could ask you so many questions on this section alone because I think it was full of gold, and honestly my copy is highlighted and scribbled and I read it and reread it. There was so much to absorb. The first thing that really stood out to me as a HR practitioner in an agile organization was this belief that focusing on one or two areas of diversity first is a good start. And from your research, what you actually found was that survey respondents found this method ineffective and actually harmful for DEI. And in your research, you also reference how important it is to be intentional and deliberate. So I guess, how do we balance this need for focus and creating change with these findings that being too narrow in our focus can actually be harmful? Might throw this one to you, Rakesh.
So thanks that you found it a report very interesting. In fact, we presented it to quite a few groups. And one of the things that I observed when we were talking about some of the beliefs and challenges, there were immediate responses, hey, we do experience in our area. So what we realized is that this whole aspect, as Jazmin talked about, many dimensions. So if you look at inclusiveness and diversity and equity across organization, there are many streams and many triggers. As diversity, we understand, in a very limited way, it may be gender or it may be religion or country, but actually it's much more in a working environment, there are many dynamics which are going around. So the challenge is, what we saw was that if you take up a project in a very sincere way and say, I'll solve one problem, okay? And let me say I'll solve problem of a region or language. Yeah? Now the issue is that most of the time you look at that, look at the most dominant minority and identify that problem. So what happens is that you actually create an inequity right there. Yeah, because there are other people, they are suffering, they are, I won't say suffering, but they are influenced by other factors of diversity. And they felt, okay, nobody is really caring for me. Yeah? So you have to look at it in a very holistic picture, and you have to look at it in a way that everybody is on board. Yeah, so you may not be able to find solution to every specific problem, but getting everybody on board and let people work in some of the environment or either psychological safety or the policy level. So create an environment where everybody can participate, and issues can be different. So they can bring up their own issues and make sure they feel that they are cared for. But that's what we actually observed.
And the second belief I thought was really interesting to call out was that this belief that we will adapt to somebody's beliefs if they ask. And your research found that not everyone is able to disclose their needs, no matter how safe the working environment. So that by relying on disclosure as the first step in the process, organizations will always be a step behind and also place the burden of change on marginalized groups. What are some things we can do, Rakesh, to remove this pressure and to be more proactive?
So there are a couple of things that we need to look at. When we talk to people, actually they discussed about the problem, and they also recommended what could be a right way of doing it. And we also discussed among ourselves. So one thing which was very clear that there was a little doubt about the sincerity of leadership. And so we felt that any organization where leader was very proactive, as like, for example, what is the basic reason? If I have a problem, if I talk about it, I am always worried what will happen when I disclose it, and is it the right issue to talk about it? So these are the questions which inhibit a lot of people not to talk about it at all. Yeah. So we have to. So that's where the proactive leadership can help people to overcome their inhibition and talk about it, because unless they discuss about it, you will never know there is a problem. Yeah, so that's the one thing. So that's the approach. So there are a couple of things that we could also recommend is proactive leadership to start with, and something which can be done is there are a lot of tools available for the managers, people leaders, I would call it. Things like coaching. You have a grow model where you can coach an individual person, even as a manager or as an independent coach. Then having a facilitation techniques. When I started my career, there was no training on facilitation. You just go into the room and conduct a meeting. But there are very nice tools, facilitation techniques, which can be brought out to get people participate. And so things like that can be really useful for being proactive and drawing people out of their inhibition. And that's definitely is with the leader. That's why we call it servant leadership. So it is their job to initiate and take the lead and get people out of their shell.
It ties quite nicely into the next question I had in mind. And, you both actually today have mentioned that a lot of challenging beliefs and calling things out. We need to build this awareness and create safe spaces and create psychological safety in our teams. So what are some examples of how we can create safe spaces for these conversations?
So the examples, some of the creating safe places is, I would say that, educating people and the leaders. So what I have seen is that if the leadership team recognizes that and educates the managers and other people. So you need to actually train people at different level and create an environment of, that everybody is participating into decision making and they're free to make choices within, of course, the constraint of the business. So the focus where I will put it is that there are many educational programs and people would like to, educated, because I normally felt that I was never trained for being a good leader. There was never training available. But these days we find that a lot of educational programs highlighting the various issues like microaggression, unconscious bias, psychological safety. So people should understand it. Things like being empathetic. So these are terminologies are there, but I find that people don't really appreciate it and understand it to the extent that they need to do, even though they are in a leadership position.
Thanks for sharing, Rakesh. I really love what you mentioned around proactive leadership there. Your research found that 47% of respondents believed organisations who achieve this unity of Agile and diversity and equity inclusion will reap the benefits and exceed competitors. Jazmin, what did these organisations do differently?
Yes, that's a great question. And actually, this ties very nicely, with the idea of, servant leadership, inclusive leadership, and how, leaders have this, this incredible challenge of, creating workspaces, that are psychologically safe. As Rakesh, just mentioned, this is really, everybody's, responsibility, but it has a lot to do, with a very strong, leadership. So we found that, several other organizations that we interviewed, they had, very strong, leadership team that, they were, really committed, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, in their agile transformation, and they were able to put, DEI at the very core, of the organization. So that's number one, having a very strong, leadership team that's actually committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that does not perceive, DEI efforts as isolated actions or initiatives. This is something that we're seeing a lot nowadays. And as a DEI coach and consultant, sometimes you see, unfortunately, several organizations that only try, very isolated and very, and they don't have, long-term strategy. So what we have seen that actually works is, having this committed leadership team that has been able to put DEI at the very core of their strategy. And actually, also a team that has been able to, serve as an advocate of, diversity, equity, and inclusion and agility, and they're able to, have advocates, throughout the organization. This is not just, a one person's job. This calls, for the effort of, of the whole organization and individuals, to, make commit to DEI and, be actively part of the Agile transformation. And also I would say, leaders that embrace mistakes and embrace, errors, throughout the process. This is something that came up a lot, during our conversations, with people in different organizations, that in many cultures and in many organizations, mistakes are punished. They're not perceived as a source of opportunity. So one of the tips or, best practices would be, having, leaders who are able to, show, the rest of the organization that mistakes are actually learning opportunities, and that you can try things out of the box and you can be more innovative, and that even if you fail, you're not going to be punished, or there won't be any consequences. Because of that, and quite on the contrary, that this is actually, a learning opportunity that we can all thrive on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what benefits did they see?
Well, they definitely saw, the greater working environment. This is something that was quoted a lot, during our interviews, with respondents, that individuals saw that, they had the chance to try new and innovative ideas. So definitely greater innovation, more creativity. The more, business morale, actually also, went up, because, they saw that, the organization was actually embracing, different perspectives, even if they failed. So, this definitely called, for greater innovation. So I would say innovation, more creativity, and a better working environment, and absolutely, new products, new ideas, that if you think about the current circumstances, with COVID, this is what organizations have to aim at, new products, more innovation, to face all the challenges that we have nowadays.
Powerful things for the listeners to think about. And here at Easy Agile, our mission is to help teams be agile, because we believe for too long the focus has been on doing, when the reality is that agile is a constant journey of becoming. And there's a specific part in the report that really stood out to me that I'd like to read. Agility is a journey with no fixed endpoint. The road towards creating diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments is the same. Agility and DEI can be pursued but never fully achieved. They are a process of ongoing learning, reflection, and improvement. A team cannot enter the process of improving business agility or DEI with a mindset towards completion, and any model that unites Agile and DEI will ultimately be ineffective if those taking part are not ready to embark on an ongoing quest for self-improvement. I absolutely love this quote. Rakesh, let's explore this a little bit further. What more can you tell me about this?
So actually, there's an interesting thing that I would like to share to start with. We wanted to look for organization who would, help us interview their people and talk to their people. And the way organization responded, some responded, oh, this is, shall I allow my people to talk to somebody? It could be a problem. But there were other organizations, they were actually chasing us, hey, we would like to be part of this, and we would like to get our people interviewed. and they were very positive about the whole thing. And I happened to talk to the DEI corporate manager, a lady, and the way she was talking was, I mean, she was so much, I would say, passionate about the whole thing. Even though at least I felt that they were very high level of awareness of DEI, but the quest for learning and finding out what they could better was quite astonishing, quite positive. Yeah, and that's where my answer is that if you look at the current pandemic, and people realize that okay, we have to work from home, and initially some people found it great. It's a great thing, work-life balance. I can attend my home, but after some time they found there's a problem. There's other problem. So the point is that in any organization, whether it's a business or a social life or people, it just keeps changing, right? So there's no method or policy which is going to be forever valid. So there's a continuous learning process that we have to get in. Yeah. So what we need to do is focus on our goal that we want to achieve, and depending on the environment, that's what we call business agility. Now bring it to people as well, because it is a people, and we talk about customer minds, customer centricity and all that. But finally, it's a people who are going to deliver whatever organization want to. So you have to see how their lives are getting impacted. Yeah, we are discussing about getting people back to office. Now the problem is that, like a city like Bangalore, it's a very costly city and very crowded city. So people have gone to their hometown and they can work from there. Now to bring them back, you have to approve them back again. So to cut short the explanation, our life is changing, constantly changing. Yeah, and technology and everything is putting. So people have to look at methods and approach of how they can be adapting themselves on a continuous basis. And so learning is a continuous process. In fact, when I got into Agile and people ask me, how many years of experience you have, I generally say 5 years, because anything that I did before 5 years is actually a wrong practice. So you have to be continuously learning, and DEI and Agile is no stranger to this situation.
I love that. I think fostering that continuous learning environment, is really key. And I suppose on that, a few of the recommendations from the report are centered around getting deeper training and intentional expertise. So, Jazmin, what further recommendations or courses or practitioners are there that people can engage with after this episode?
Sure. An important part of our report was a series of recommendations to the entire Agile community and practitioners, to organizations and, Agile coaches. You can see that you could get more specific information in our reports. I would like to encourage all of you to read. But definitely when it comes to Agile coaches and consultants, we're encouraging people to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because one of the insights and the learnings we drew from this research is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not specifically included in the Agile world. When we talked to the respondents in many different countries, they did not spontaneously make the connection between agility, Agile, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the more we talk about it, they discovered that, indeed they were very closely overlapped, or there was a symbiotic relationship, between them, because you're putting, the person and everything that, relates to an individual at the very core of the organization and the transformation. So definitely, we do encourage leaders and Agile coaches, to start learning more about DEI, building that proficiency, learning more about unconscious bias and the impact of unconscious bias and discrimination and racism that will continue to see in organizations. So they're more mindful of, those voices that are not being heard at the moment in, the present conversations, so they can learn, different techniques or, different methods, to be more engaging and more inclusive. Now, when it comes to the Agile community in general and influencers, so it is important to mention that Evan Layburn, the founder of the Business Agility Institute, is having at the moment some conversations with important institutions in the Agile community, such as the Agile Alliance and Scrum Alliance, because we are looking for, we do want to see diversity, equity, and inclusion as an important component that is explicitly embedded in Agile. So stay tuned, because I'm pretty sure there will be some interesting news in the near future about how to redesign those Agile ways of working, to make them more inclusive, so we can serve the needs of the whole of all the Agile customers. So that's going to be very interesting. And personally, I don't know if this is going to translate into a new Agile manifesto, but definitely I think that we need to make DE&I more explicitly a more explicit part and component of the Agile framework.
Amazing. Hearing you get so excited makes me feel really excited. And I think it is so important, like you said, to make sure that these things are embedded in the organizations. And another one of our favorite quotes from the report is, "People are the beating heart of Agile. If people are not empowered by inclusive and equitable environments, Agile doesn't work. If Agile doesn't work, Agile organizations can't work." Rakesh, what can people take away from this quote?
Yeah, that's actually, I would say, like hitting the nail on the head. I mentioned to you that in my career for about 2.5 decades, doing all transformation, I always found some people not really receptive to transformation, and I'm talking about big change, not small change. And so reflecting back, what it appears that, for example, take example of a CMI implementation. Yeah, so this was a great expectation was there to be a mature organization, a development center in Bangalore. But what we realized that we normally focused on technology and processes. Yeah, so we all our focus was to get technology right, get the process right, documented, conduct few trainings, and our job is done. Okay, but what we didn't care about is that this is going to impact people. It's going to impact their life. It's going to impact their role. Yeah, so that is something that was not really addressed, and maybe still a lot of work has to be done. So with this research insight that we have been talking about, and Jazmin has been talking about various aspects, it's finally the people who are going to deliver it, as I said. Yeah. So we want to bring back to the management and the community that please do something, starting with your people. Yeah. It's nice to be customer centric. It's nice to be that, but you can't forget your people, and they have to be the first priority. So that's the thought that I can share.
We've pulled out a few recommendations and asked you questions on them, but really, where do we go from here? Jazmin, what are some examples of the recommendations that have had the biggest impact on organizations that you can share here with our listeners?
Sure. I think we've been talking a lot about, using systems approach, to, Agile transformations, where you put, DEI at the very center of, the process. I mean, this is not a one person's job. It is important to have, strong leadership. It is very important, to have, leaders, with a vision and commitment, who can actually, put, DEI at the very core of, the Agile transformation process, and their business strategy in the long term. I mean, that's one thing, but it's not just the role of the of the leaders. It's everybody's job. Like every individual in every single department, who have the responsibility, to analyze their own biases and analyze their own ways of working, how they are involving other people, how inclusive they're being on a day-to-day basis. And I'm talking about how, our styles and our ways that we conduct meetings, how inclusive we are being in the way, how we listen to other people, how willing we are, to make some modifications and changes to our, behavior, to cater to the needs of other people. Including, people with disabilities, people, whose first language, might not be English, or the language of the organization. People with different thinking styles, and thinking preferences or personality types. It could be that shy person, whose voice is never heard, at that meeting or that at that daily stand up, whose opinion has never been considered. How willing are we? And how ready are we, to make some changes, to our meetings and our communication styles? How willing are we, to, be more creative in the communication channels, we are using, to, cater to, those people's needs, and to make sure, their voices are heard and they're being part of the decision making. So I'd like to stress this because it's not, a single person's job, it's everybody's job. You could be an accountant, you could be in human resources, you could be in sales. But if we don't use them in a systems approach, and if we don't start thinking about the importance of working in a cross-functional way, which is so important, in agile transformations. If we continue working in silos and, just using the old ways or our own way, to communicate with people or do business, we're not going to get there. We need to get out of our comfort zone, embrace our mistakes, as I mentioned before, as learning opportunities, and, actually, work in a more collaborative way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so many powerful things to take away and think of from everything you've both said today. Is there anything you would like to add that we haven't discussed that you think would be important for our listeners to hear or to understand? I'll throw to you first, Rakesh.
Yeah, so one thing that will be very useful is that when we talk to people about, especially at the management level, about this project. So one of the questions that comes is, okay, fine, this is all good. We'll make the investment, but what do we get? What is our benefit to the organization? We are running a business. So I would. This is something that we discussed very intensely when we were making a report finally. So there were evidences in terms of interviews where people did give us two insights, which I would like to share. One is that if there is somebody having, diversity can get you people, let's say it could be a disability, but they could be very talented people. Yeah, we talk about very talented people who may have autistic as a issue, but they have certain unique capability in creativeness. Yeah? So you're missing out on very talented people by not having an open approach. The second part is if you have such talented people in your organization, your product innovation can be addressed to many others who are not able to use the products which are there. For example, if you have a mobile phone, yeah, if somebody has a problem typing, yeah, they can use voice command. Now, maybe not all of us can think about it, that how they can be helpful to other people. So I see that these approaches can help in not being a cost, but it can be a way of innovation, product innovation, and can actually help the business and also help the people who need help. Yeah? So that's what I would like to talk about.
Amazing, thank you. And Jazmin, is there anything else that you would like to add that you think is important for our listeners?
Well, besides encouraging everybody, to read our report and to contribute to the conversation, I would like to encourage everybody, to take immediate action. I would say that, over the last years, we have not seen the progress that we would like to see. Change has been very, very slow. for a variety of reasons. As we mentioned before, a lot of DEI initiatives have been, very isolated, and a lot of organizations, don't have a clear long-term strategy when it comes to DEI. And there's still a lot of skepticism in the corporate world because many, DEI initiatives, and trainings, they're not embedded in the strategy of the organization or the agile transformation. So there's a clear gap there. But with more education, with more training, with continuous education, and and more leaders who can actually understand, the very strong connection between DEI and agile transformation, I think that we can accelerate, the speed of that change, and that's what we would all like, to see. The world is changing, has changed, dramatically, over the last years, especially with COVID. And I think that individuals around the world, they are expecting and they would like to see, agile, but also, very inclusive organizations. That's what, millennials are looking for. That's, what Gen Zers are looking for. So there's a big call out there, for organizations, to embrace, this type of transformation, but putting, DEI at the very core of the organization. That's what I would like to say and contribute to the discussion. This is, a pilot project that we are hoping to, conduct more research on other, DEI areas related to, agility, and we would like, listeners, to be part of the conversation, and to contribute with their experience to, improve, the state of agility in the current moment.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I can't wait to see how Agile and diversity and equity and inclusion evolves in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot to both of you, and it was nice to share our experience. Well, thank you very much.